All right, we are going to keep on keeping on with learning Go, and I'm actually going to follow this tutorial in this video, creating a RESTful API with Go and Gin. Okay, so I went ahead and created my repo on GitHub and then cloned it down, and now I'm opening it up. Okay. If you want a video on how to do that, let me know, please. All right, so we have our README, and that's pretty much it in this file. So we are ready to get started. Okay, so Gin is going to be a framework that we can use within Go, and it's just going to be able to help us create a router and route our different HTTP requests a little bit easier. And I am going to try to figure out how to use it. Okay. All right, so looks like we are going to be creating a get endpoint for albums and a post endpoint for albums. Oh, and we're going to be able to get one album with the ID. All right, so you can see that we are going to go ahead and this is them just setting up the file and the folder, and I already have that done. Also, side note, if you see my daughter is watching Minnie Mouse right now, so I can record this video. All right, so we can go ahead and skip down to step 3. So we want to create the module in which we can manage dependencies. All right, so we are going to run the go mod init command. Okay, so we're going to say go mod init, and then we're naming our module. So I am going to say go plus gin. All right, and then you can see it created this full file here, go.mod, and our module's name is go plus gin. And this is the version of Go that we're using. All right, perfect. All right. So next thing that we want to do is we're going to create our data. So I'm not going to use a database for this one. I think that'll be my next step in my Go learning process is how to create a database and connect to it. But now we're just going to kind of use a struct in order to manage our data. Okay. To be honest, I'm a little bit confused about what a struct is because I've never used Go before. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to look that up. All right, and we can see struct. A struct is a collection of fields, okay? So to me, this looks like a struct is going to be kind of like an object in JavaScript. So I'm actually going to write versus JavaScript. Okay, so Go provides built-in data structures like arrays, slices, maps, and structs to organize data, while JavaScript relies more on objects and arrays. All right. So now I'll type in something like Go, what is a struct? Because I want a deep understanding of what I'm using. A user-defined type that stores a collection of fields into a single field. A blueprint or a template to represent an object. All right, so let's go to here. Okay, so a struct type. So basically this would be like a type in TypeScript, I'm guessing, when you would write out what everything is. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. So in this tutorial, they are going to be using album because they're going to create albums. And you know what? We might as well do the same thing. Okay, so I am going to then go figure out what we're doing. So we are creating a main.go file now. So let's go ahead and do main.go. All right, and the first thing that we do is this package main. All right, so I want to understand why I'm doing this package main. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to use AI to explain what this code block is. It declares a package name is main. The package keyword is used to define the scope of code, and main is the name of the package. Okay, that is helpful. So yeah, this is kind of how I use AI when I'm learning something new, is to explain code. All right, next. All right, so now let's actually define our struct. So type album struct. I also, even though AI is starting to tell me what to type, I'm going to force myself to type it out myself so I can get that muscle memory when I'm creating these things, and it helps me memorize and understand a little bit better what I'm writing. So even though AI is telling me this is probably what you want to write, and it turns out that is what I want to write, I'm going to make myself type it so that way I remember it. Okay. All right, so we have a struct here, and one of the fields is going to be, okay, struct tags such as JSON artist specify what the field's name should be. Okay, so this is saying in our JSON object, the field for ID is going to be called ID when the struct's contents are serialized into JSON. Without them, the JSON would use the struct's capital field names, which is not common in JSON. Oh, okay, that makes sense. All right, so then we have title, string, JSON, title. All right, then we have artist, string, and then that makes sense that we'd have JSON, artist. Also, you can kind of tell I'm starting to type a little bit faster. My finger is getting used to like, this is how we write it. Okay, float 64. I need to look that up. Oops. All right, so I am going to highlight this here, and then I'm going to go ahead and say explain so I can figure out what exactly float 64 means. The code snippet is defining a field named price of type float64 in a struct. It also has a struct tag JSON price, which means that when the struct is serialized to JSON, the price field will be represented as price. Wow, that was a beautiful explanation of that whole line. Let me see if I can just do an explanation of this float64. And if we don't get something good, we'll go to Google then. Is a data type in Go represented by a floating point number with 64 bits of precision. It can hold decimal values with fractional digits. Okay, so price, that makes sense. We would want to use decimals, and it allows 64 bits of precision. Okay, that is helpful. All right, so now beneath the struct declaration, so this is just defining like the shape of the data that we're going to use, okay? So now we can paste the following slice of album structs, okay? So album slice to seed record album data. Okay, so we have an array of type album, right? And then this is our type album here. Okay, and then each of these, it looks like, is an album struct following the type. Okay. So let's go ahead and do that. So var, and again, gonna type it out. Albums is equal to album. Spelled that wrong. Spelled it wrong again. All right. And I am gonna let it do its thing here. Looks like it knows exactly what tutorial I'm following. All right. There we go. Now let's kind of see what's going on here. Oh, so it's just mad it's unused. What's it mad about here? Type album unused. Okay. So now we need to write the code to implement our first endpoint. We can do that. Okay, so when a client makes a request to get/albums, we want to return all of the albums as JSON. So what we want to do is we want to return all of these albums here, and we want to return them as JSON. So when they're serialized, they will have the lowercase property names. All right, so we need to write the code. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to write the function that's called when we hit that route, right? So when we hit the get/albums, we're going to call this function, okay? So let's make that function here. So we're going to say func get albums. All right, and then it looks like we have this thing C, which is going to be, I don't know if we call it of type gen.context. Okay, so we're going to probably have to have GitHub Copilot explain that to us. So I'm going to just type it as is. So C. Butterfly. You're a butterfly? Yes. Oh my goodness, that sounds fun. Sorry about that. indented JSON, and then HTTP status okay albums. Okay, so my guess,
Hi.
you're gonna fly like a butterfly.
Yes.
Okay, go fly.
Mine is like Minnie.
You're like Minnie Mouse because she's flying.
Yes.
All right. This might not have been the best idea to try to do this while my daughter's playing, but that's all right. Okay. So we have c.indented JSON, HTTP status okay, and then albums. Okay, so my guess before we do this is that we are going to, I see that C is gin context. So I'm thinking that that's going to be like the context surrounding the request and the response that we're going to put into this function so we can use that. Based on this, I'm thinking it's going to be saving the status we want to return, which is going to be an okay status, and then we're going to be sending back our albums here, is my guess. Okay, so I'm going to actually just highlight this whole thing, and then I'm going to click explain. So that way I can see if, do I understand this correctly? But always be making those guesses yourself and trying to think it through before you just go and explain it. All right, so defines a function called get albums in Go. It takes a pointer. Okay, so I think that's what this thing is the pointer. Okay, to a gin context object as a parameter. Okay, I think I'm going to need to explain that more, but let's continue. Inside the function, it uses the indented JSON method of gin context object to respond with a JSON representation of the album's variable. Okay, that's what we understood. The HTTP status code 200OK is used to indicate a successful response. All right, so now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually go and explain just this pointer spot because that's the spot that is a little bit fuzzy to me. This code snippet declares a parameter named C of type gin context, which is a pointer to the context object in the gin framework for Go. Okay, so I'm going to then Google Go, what is a pointer? A variable that stores in memory address of another variable. A variable that holds the memory address of another variable. It allows you to indirectly access and modify the value of the variable it points to. Okay, so when we use C, we're pointing to this variable gin context. Okay, that makes sense to me. All right, let's keep on keeping on. All right, so we wrote a getAlbums function that takes a gin context parameter. We could have given this function any name. Neither gin nor Go require a particular function name format. That's helpful to know. Gin context is the most important part of gin. It carries the request details. Okay, that's what we thought. Validates and serializes JSON. Okay, that makes sense with line 23 and more. Despite the similar name, it is different than Go's built-in context password. Call context.indented JSON to serialize the struct into JSON and add it to the response. Okay, that makes sense, and that is what we thought. We thought it was adding it to the response. The function's first argument is the HTTP status code you want to send to the client. Here you're passing the status OK constant from the net HTTP package, which makes sense because it went ahead and added this to our imports. To indicate 200, okay? That makes sense. Note you can replace the context indented JSON with a call to context.json to send a more compact JSON. In practice, the indented form is much easier to work with when debugging, and the size difference is usually small. Okay, so what I would do here is once we get the route set up and we test it working, I would probably change this call here from using the indented JSON method to using the JSON method to see what that looks like in my response and to figure out kind of which one I prefer and stuff like that and to better understand what they're talking about here. Okay, let's go ahead and finish this step number 2 and then we'll probably call it for this video, but let's go ahead and do it. All right, so near the top of main Go, okay, so I'm going to add it right here. We need our main function. func main. All right. So paste the code below to assign the handler function to an endpoint path. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to create our router. Um, gen dot default. Nope. All right. I feel like that's setting up our router, but I don't really understand how it's doing that. So I'll probably ask it to explain it to me and do any Googling that I need to. Albums. All right. So when we have hit the endpoint albums with a get request, we want to forward that request to our handler, which is going to be the function get albums. Okay, now we are going to actually, when we call this main function, we actually need to get this set up and running. So we're going to use the run method. So I'm going to go ahead and explain this function, and then we can go ahead and start our server. Main function that sets up a gen router registers a get route for the albums that calls the get albums function and starts the server on localhost 8080. All right, so I'm going to highlight just this get default to see if I can get a little bit more information on how that's working or like how I would talk about it. Initializes a new instance of gen engine type, which is a web framework for building HTTP services in Go. It returns a router, okay, with some default middleware already attached, such as logging, recovery middleware. Okay. And then it's assigned to the router variable. That makes sense. Okay, so in this code, we initialize a gen router using default. We use the get function to associate the get HTTP method and /albums path with a handler function. Okay. And then we're using the run function to attach the router to an HTTP server and start the server. All right, so this is just adding our imports, which already got imported here. All right, and you can see that we have a problem. So let's look at what our problem is. Could not import because we don't have this package. So let's go to quick fix and take a look at what the quick fix is, which is probably just doing go get. All right, and then let's save this. All right, because we had to actually get the package so we can import it. All right. And yep, it looks like we had to go get and add that gen thing. So now what we can do is we can do go run. All right, and you can see that we have a get route /albums already set up. So I'm going to grab Postman. Oops. And sorry, I got to authenticate my Postman real quick. All right. And I am going to, sorry, I'm typing on Postman real quick, but I will pull it up. All right, so we have our get route 8080 /album. So if I click send, 404 page not found. Interesting. Oh, okay. So it says that we already are listening on port 8080 in a different window, and we are. So now let's go ahead and start this again. All right, so now we have our listening and serving HTTP. So I should have continued reading further, and let's go ahead and click send. Okay, perfect. And we can see that it went and got our albums. Okay. And I like that it gives us a little log as well. All right, so the next thing that we said that we wanted to do is we wanted to change this to just c.json to see what that's like. So let's go ahead and restart our server and go ahead and click send. Looks the same to me. So I might have to research that a little bit more to see what the differences are and maybe Postman's doing something here. So anywho, that's where we're going to end this one. When we pick back up, I'm going to go ahead and look at getting one album specifically using a param, and I'm going to look at posting a new album to our albums collection. All right. Hopefully this was helpful. Let me know, and I hope you guys are learning in public too.